We are back for another episode of the Gold Standard here on Fox 19 Now with Charlie Goldsmith. I am Joe Daneman. In this podcast, we talk Reds and Bengals and get you in and out in 30 minutes. But I'm going to sprinkle in some Bearcats and Musketeer basketball. Maybe even some Miami Redhawks, who are now the darling of college basketball this season. Let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, the big news as of this taping today on Thursday is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have picked their offensive coordinator. It's not Dan Pitcher. It doesn't mean the Bengals are out of the woods yet. There are still several teams across the league who are looking for offensive coordinators. How big of a deal would this be if the Bengals lost Dan Pitcher?
It would be a bigger deal if Brian Callahan wasn't already on the market. But what it's kind of a sign of just in general is specifically Dan Pitcher's clear interest in being a play caller elsewhere is the clearest sign we've had yet of the fact that teams around the league just don't give much credit to Bengals offensive coaches. And we've spent months, years talking about the defense and everything that's gone wrong. And the offense has been great since 2021. But aside from one Jake Browning stretch that got Brian Callahan the Titans job, there has been no one on the Bengals staff who's gotten a promotion elsewhere. So that's something I think you see that frustration reflected in Pitcher exploring other opportunities.
If Dan Pitcher were to leave, is Brian Callahan the no-brainer replacement?
To me, yes. Honestly, I think Brian deserves another head coaching opportunity at some point because he got a really raw deal in Tennessee. What I know, by knowing Brian, what I've seen from Brian in the past is he has a very, very clear vision and idea for, I would say his strengths would be team building, individual development, and then meshing a passing game with pass protection and how you pick up blitzes. Those are very specific strengths that are exciting and appealing to me. That made Brian what I thought a great OC in Cincinnati, and I think he should get continued opportunities elsewhere.
And he would also be accepting of what his role would be here in Cincinnati as not the play caller. And that's the interesting part about this. Let's say Dan Pitcher were to leave, and if Brian Callahan weren't available, how difficult would it be for Zack Taylor to find an offensive coordinator who would come in here and accept not being a play caller, or would it be something he just has to promote from within because they understand the system?
It would be a loss because Pitcher's done it. He's been very good. If it wouldn't be Callahan, he's done it. He's been very good. But the plan all along, and this hasn't worked out, but the offense has worked out. The plan all along was that Burrow would stay healthy in 2023. They'd have another great year. They thought they'd be unbelievable again in 24. The offense was more than good enough. If Burrow stays healthy in 2025, again, it's one of the best offenses in football. What Zack Taylor has been preparing years for is developing behind the scenes the offensive coaching staff. And I mentioned this a bit earlier, the idea that Justin Riscotti, Troy Walters, Justin Hill haven't really gotten any looks any time, any year across the league. And then even under the radar guys like a Jordan Sulkin or a Freddie Knighton, Brad Cragthorpe, there is offensive coaching talent on this staff that they could promote from within.
Let's talk about Zack Taylor and play calling because it seems to come up really every offseason or maybe sometimes even during this season. With the head coach calling plays, would Zack be better served to game manage and let someone else do the play calling? Do you think this is ego? And this question was put to me by Tony Pike and Austin Elmore on Cincy 360. They asked me if I thought this was Zack Taylor's ego. And I said, well, look, anybody in the situation a head coach is in is going to have an ego. You don't get these kinds of jobs around the league without an ego. And if you're Zack Taylor, and this might be your only opportunity ever to be a head coach here in Cincinnati, if you want to do it your way, you're going to do it your way. What's your take on Zack Taylor, the offensive play caller? Is it time for him to give it up, or is the offense humming at a point now that that's the least of their concerns?
I want to start here because this is a conversation because Dan Pitcher's exploring play calling opportunities elsewhere. Dan hasn't told me this. No one said me this directly, but making the point I just made about how, for whatever reason, the way Bengals offensive coaches are viewed, I think that you have a better chance to become a head coach as the play caller for the Buccaneers than as the offensive play caller who's a coordinator in Cincinnati. I think it's even as simple as, oh, well, just give Dan Pitcher play calling duties. Well, that might still not help get Dan what he wants, which is the best opportunity, just like any coach would, to be a head coach. because of how Cincinnati works. So I view those as kind of different parts of the equation. With Zack specifically, frankly, I just think they've been really good at calling plays. I think that the Joe Flacco experience was another great example of you don't mess with the passing game in an all-in season where you don't want to have to develop a coach in a brand new role. Just keep doing what you've been doing, because I have no problem with what they've done with the passing game.
I mentioned the Cincy 360 show. I was also asked about the idea if the Bengals were on the clock and Ruben Bain and Caleb Downs were both available, who would I take? Well, I said, listen, I sat there through more than an hour of Duke Tobin talking, and one of the walking points I left with was that Duke Tobin really values pass rush and understands that the Bengals need it. And looking at next year, if Trey Hendrickson isn't a Cincinnati Bengal, and I think everybody watching this or listening to this assumes he won't be, your starting two defensive ends as of now, correct me if I'm wrong, would be Myles Murphy and Shamar Stewart. And that doesn't feel good enough.
Yeah.
You still have to find someone that's going to come in and be an instant difference maker, even though Myles Murphy has shown growth. And we don't know yet about Shamar Stewart. Certainly the traits are there. The production hasn't been there. How can you go into 2026 with the idea that you have to be better defensively without some kind of a quote-unquote game wrecker at defensive end? So that's why I said Ruben Bain would be the slam dunk pick. Now they asked about Caleb Downs. And the reason I bring this up is I want a platform here because I heard some people, apparently after I was on the segment, were upset that I said that Caleb Downs is not an elite playmaker. So let me fill in the gap there before I get your opinion on Caleb Downs and what he would bring to the Cincinnati Bengals. Caleb Downs is a playmaker at the line of scrimmage, in the run game, anything 10 yards down the field from the line of scrimmage, and he's as good as it gets. You can use him in any different position, it feels like, in the defensive back room except outside corner. He's amazing in the run game, the way he reads, the way he processes, the way he helps teammates. I said he's not an elite playmaker when the ball's in the air down the field because we just haven't seen it. And I brought up two names, and sometimes it's unfair to bring up just Ed Reed and Troy Polamalu because we saw them so much by covering a team here in the AFC North, seeing the Ravens and seeing the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those guys were such elite playmakers with the ball in the air, with the ball in their hand. We haven't seen that from Caleb Downs. It doesn't mean he wouldn't be a slam dunk pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. It doesn't mean he could not be a playmaker for this team going forward. I just haven't seen it with the ball in the air down the field. Now, you could argue Ohio State's defense was so good, teams didn't take many shots against the Buckeyes, and that's true as well. My question to you is, am I wrong? What's your opinion on Caleb Downs and how the fit would be here in Cincinnati if he's there at number 10?
You'd like to be able to get it all, right? And so I view Caleb Downs as just a viable option as these defensive linemen. I haven't studied these guys well enough yet to truly rank them, but as I get a sense of the draft, Downs is squarely in that conversation just because of what that versatility that unlocked for the Bengals defense. They don't have a human being on the roster who can do so many things out of the slot position, who can stick his nose in and stop the run, who can blitz, who can make a play on the ball in the middle of the field. And even if he's not Ed Reed or Troy Polamalu, he would give them a versatility and a playmaking upside that I think this coaching staff is much more interested in adding and developing on this roster. Now, the question is, do you do that at the expense of a defensive lineman? And I think the best answer is I'd like to be able to make that decision on draft night as opposed to having to go into the draft saying, well, we checked one box, we didn't check the other, so now we got to draft this. So attack free agency, build enough versatility to allow you to pick the best player, and then add either a defensive lineman or a safety who is versatile enough, which Down is, to fit with what you have.
We talked last episode about some of the defensive linemen and edge players that the Bengals could attack during free agency. If you want to listen to that episode, just go back one and check it out. Charlie laid it out with some great names to look out for here in free agency. But say the Bengals are on draft night, and we don't know what's going to happen in free agency. If all things were the same right now and the roster wasn't touched and they had a decision of Ruben Bain or Caleb Downs, edge player, safety, what would you say right now would be the pick? Just in this hypothetical scenario, And what would you say is the priority position-wise, edge rusher or safety for this team going forward?
It's a great question. Again, like my biggest fear is that they're stuck and pigeonholed in the draft like they were last year, and so you don't even get to make that choice. I haven't studied these guys well enough for this to be an informed opinion. I mean, Caleb Downs would play every snap.
He would.
Caleb Downs would unlock a new level of play calling for Al Golden, and if he can do the things over the middle of the field that I'm starting to get the sense that he can, he is a presence and a skill set that changes the identity of this defense. And Ruben Bain can make plays. He can be a playmaker. But I like the idea of using, hopefully, the only top 10 pick you're going to have in a long time to get a true identity scheme change.
Such a great word. Identity, scheme changer, great. Versatility. He checks all those boxes. He is an elite defensive football player. I watched every snap he played for 2 years in Columbus. The guy does not make mistakes. I like to say he's like Iceman from Top Gun. Ice cold, never makes mistakes. That is Caleb Downs. And the intangibles too, right? He's a very mature guy. I'm not saying Ruben Bain isn't this thing. I just don't know as much about Ruben Bain as I know Caleb Downs. The intangibles of being a leader, a playmaker, and a guy who changes identities, and you put him in that defense, you put him in that locker room. He's one of those guys that feels like a foundational piece for this team going forward. I think it would be a great pick either way.
And you know what the best part is? If you sign a safety in free agency, you can still draft Downs, and you can move him around, you can move the board. All of a sudden, you've got this whole little swirl going on with two very good outside corners in Dax Hill and DJ Turner. Now you're kind of cooking.
I'm just glad I had a public forum on the record to say that I believe Caleb Downs is a playmaker. Okay, there are different kinds of playmakers. He is an elite playmaker. He showed that at Ohio State and Alabama. Let's transition now to the Cincinnati Reds. Reds Fest just happened last weekend. And if you're wondering how excited Cincinnati is for the Reds to be back in the playoffs and now have this young team they expect to take another step this year, the crowds were massive.
Massive.
They told me a number they expected, and they almost doubled that number of fans who were at the convention center to get a picture, get an autograph, rub shoulders with some of the Cincinnati Reds. You had a chance to be there and observe it and talk to some of the players. What was your biggest takeaway, Charlie, from Reds Fest, either what you saw, what you observed, or what you had a conversation with?
What I'm calling the next wave is here. Like sometimes guys just show up and there's a presence and a maturity and a physicality about them that's just, oh, these are grown-ups now almost. And I know I'm just a 27-year-old saying that, but that's the thing scouts do. And I saw Steer, Ellie, Friedel, going back to Jonathan India and Stevenson, like go through that process themselves. And especially now that Reds Fest is in January, a couple weeks before spring training, you now get a fantastic sense of the shape that these guys are going to be in when they report to camp. And Sal Stewart, Chase Burns, Rhett Lauder, Hector Rodriguez walk in the door. Kind of throw in Noelvi Marte too, because he didn't make the team last year. And then you can throw in two prospects on the other end, Cam Collier and Edwin Arroyo. Like this wave, and for Cam and Edwin it might be later, Noelvi's already here, but this wave is pretty much here. And I think all those guys, some more than others, most of those guys are going to play big roles this year. And I think at some point we'll see all those guys, maybe except for Cam Collier, but maybe Cam in 2026. And that's an interesting spot for a small market team to be in.
Sal Stewart, you spoke with Sal Stewart. He's completely remade his body, correct?
Yes.
It's completely different. He's a guy who made a splash near the end of last year. Reds fans, and I'll get to the question Reds fans keep asking me, but they keep asking me, is this everything the Reds are going to do? If it is, it feels like there's going to be a role for Sal Stewart in 2026.
Regardless. And so, like I'll say it a million times, the Reds are still looking and planning to add to the roster. They are speaking about this as an unfinished roster. There will be a move that gets made. Will that be a move that satisfies Reds fans? Let's see. But no matter what, they could go out and get Eugenio Suarez. I mean, I'm not expecting that. I'm not reporting that, but that would be the best dream case scenario. They could do that, and Sal's still going to play a ton on this team. That's because how good he is. Terry Francona calls him one of the most polished young hitters that he's ever seen. Sal, his confidence, his demeanor, he'll go through ups and downs. All rookies do, but I'm betting on that guy. They're betting on that guy. They believe in that guy.
My question was going to be that I get often from Reds fans is this it? Is middle relief help, bolstering the bullpen, really going to be it? Because Reds fans have been chasing the mythical big right-handed bat now for several years, and we've said on the show many times that maybe Noelvi Marte is that guy. But you're working under the belief that the roster is not finished. The question would be, is there a needle mover out there that the Reds could still go after? And if so, who might that person be? You mentioned Eugenio Suarez. Look, that might
They'd have
happen.
to free up a lot of money
Correct.
to make that happen.
Correct. But are they doing that with the Gavin Lux trade? Is that part of what they're trying to do, is free up some payroll to maybe go out and get not an elite bat, but a difference maker?
They've freed up payroll to an extent in a way that I think helps get them to the Austin Hayes, Rhys Hoskins, Paul Goldschmidt tier. I'm pulling up my handy-dandy spreadsheet. I've spent a lot of time working on who these names could be and who that bat could be. On the free agent market, you've got Hayes, Hoskins, Goldschmidt, Miguel Andujar, Nate Lowe. No program changers, but all role players and hitters who add to your depth and make you feel better about. There's no cleanup hitter in that group. A guy who I wouldn't sleep on either is Harrison Bader, who's not a great hitter, but is one of the best center field defenders in the game. They're leaning in on defense. And then,
but he was here.
He was here.
Wasn't great here.
Was not great
But he was excellent last year.
Yes.
He really was.
Yes. He was solid last year. I don't know.
Excellent for who he is.
I don't know that you expect. I think you expect him to hit 7th to 9th while playing elite center field defense. The reason I'm talking about him is because Terry Francona said they've had TJ Friedel say, like, hey, maybe you might take some reps in left this offseason, and that has made me take a closer look at who the center fielders they could add are. And then on the trade market, I've got guys maybe a bit higher ceiling here. Isaac Paredes, Lars Nootbaar, Tristan Casas, maybe Andy Pajes if the Dodgers want to do something really bold. And then guys on the Mets and Blue Jays, young guys who have kind of been squeezed out of playing time. Addison Barger, Nathan Lukes, Mark Vientos. Those are kind of Spencer Steer types with a bit more pop.
So there are some names to keep in mind as the Reds look at free agency, as they look at possible trades, with spring training getting ever and ever so close for the Cincinnati Reds. Now, you mentioned some players like an Andy Pajes, and that made me think of all that's happening around Major League Baseball right now. The Dodgers have built this monster of a roster. The New York Mets have had a big week, right? They got Freddie Peralta. They've added Bo Bichette. They've got a team now that looks like it's ready to try to make amends for what happened last year. When you look across the rest of the league, now Milwaukee got worse because they lost Freddie Peralta. When you look across the league, especially the National League, and you start thinking about the Reds sneaking in last year on literally the last day of the season, how do you think these moves around the National League are affecting the Reds in the hierarchy of trying to make the playoffs?
Well, last year we talked about a National League getting more top-heavy, and then this year I see a National League that's even top-heavier. Now you say that, and then a team like the Brewers lead the league in wins, and you're reminded of organizational structure and development and the power that still has. Also, you look at the Mets, and this kind of what they've said is their offseason focus has been pitching and defense, really defense. I'm not sold on, like, they think Bichette is going to fix their third base defense and Polanco is going to fix their first base defense. They're former shortstops. They've never played third or first before. So, like, we'll see how that plan goes. But the investment in defense by a very, very smart executive in David Stearns leads me to believe that teams are now viewing elite defense as more of an equalizer than maybe they did 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago with how the game has changed. And teams set up to play great defense like the Brewers, and the Reds are trying. They're not there yet, but they're trying. Maybe that's an equalizer between these teams.
One final question here on the Reds before we transition to the Gold Rush. Chase Burns is another Cincinnati Red you spoke to at Reds Fest. He's so electric to watch, had so many big-time moments his first year here in Cincinnati. What was your takeaway from your conversation with the Reds' fireball right-hander?
He is having his first real offseason as a pro, where he is working on getting stronger, on pitching deeper into games. The big thing for him is pitching full season. Now, nobody pitches 200 innings anymore, but Chase, you remember they moved him to the bullpen to limit his innings. Well, they basically maxed out what they had. They believe that sets him up to pitch as long as he can go in 2026. And that's a good spot for Chase Burns to be. Now, we'll probably discuss, all of us at some point, what does this rotation battle look like? Someone always gets hurt, so it'll change. But Burns has nothing left to prove in AAA. And I would expect that he has a sizable lead over Rhett Lauder right now. Get Rhett a few starts in AAA to get his feet wet after missing a full season.
Okay.
That's how strongly they feel about where Chase Burns is at.
Now to the Gold Rush. We're going to switch it up this week. We're going to talk college basketball in the Gold Rush. Charlie has season tickets to both the Bearcats and the Musketeers.
You need to point. That's me. I'm still sitting here.
Still here. I know. But it's kind of a cool thing. It's a rare thing for somebody to have that, right? So I wanted to point it out, that Charlie watches both teams with a fan's eye, but also a reporter head at the same time.
Sure.
So Wes Miller, Bearcats, as of this taping, they beat Iowa State, the number 2 team in the country. They go to Arizona. They get overwhelmed a little bit by Arizona's size and ability to score in the paint. What's your take on Wes Miller and his future here in Cincinnati? Is it NCAA tournament or bust for UC's head coach?
Yes, and the thing that I've said, they're playing better now, and this point maybe was a bit more on the top of your mind a week and a half ago. But then you saw it as well in Arizona when how the offense just was stuck. There was no shooting. That's been a problem for years. And their fix to the problem this year was by bringing in, this was their plan in March, bring in Kirk Kriisa, a proven, he's been electric shooter, playmaker, and bring in Sean Abayev, who is a McDonald's All-American, a sniper, they thought could be a potential pick right away. They planned, from what I understand, that was when it was January and you're in the Big 12 and you need a bucket, that you give the ball to one of those guys, or at least they'd be able to make a big shot for you. And the fact that it's gone so far as to, Kerr, he was a bit banged up, but is basically not in the rotation anymore. He played a minute yesterday. And Sean Abayev played 5 minutes against Iowa State, played a bit more against Arizona, but really should have played more than that. The fact that the guys you brought in to fix your problem can't play, that to me is a sign where you're not going in a good direction.
Thought Sean Abayev actually had one of his better games he's had in a while against Arizona. I'm with you. I would like to have seen more of him in that game. Then there's Xavier, who scores 93 points on the road at Creighton, and it's 1 point short. Richard Pitino, now you've seen him for more than a half a season here in Cincinnati. What's your takeaway on Richard Pitino and the state of the Xavier program in his first year with the Musketeers?
I've said this to you before about Xavier, and I know Milicevic has eligibility remaining and all rights the same way, but this could be a team that looks completely different next season. What Pitino has shown is the ability to adjust and adjust again and adjust again to maximize the personnel that are hot and fit best together. This was a team that had Anderson and Robinson kind of running the show game 1. Obviously, Robinson barely plays anymore. Anderson's been in, been out. But they've redesigned their offense again and again and again based on, all right, now we need to go 5 out. All right, now Roddy's one of our hottest players. Let's feature him more. Now Roddy's maybe hurting you a bit more on the defensive end. Let's shift back to Philip Vorvichinen running the offense. The ability to tinker and adjust and find answers like that, combined with a clear identity, I really believe in his vision.
I don't know how much you watch or are following the Miami Redhawks story with Travis Steele. They're 20-0, one of only 3 undefeated teams left in college basketball. They're ranked for the first time this century. The last time the Redhawks were ranked before this week was in 1999 with Wally Zerbiak. That was the year you were born, correct?
About 98, yeah.
98, okay, so yeah, you were
Same
alive.
season, I guess, because it was December of 98, so into the 99 season.
99 season. Okay, my question about Miami is this, and I think it's going to be a great talking point as we get closer and closer to March, and if they keep winning games. What's the max number of games they can lose and still make it to the NCAA tournament as an at-large if they don't win the MAC championship? Because their analytics numbers aren't great when you talk about strength of schedule, when you talk about who they played. Now, Travis Steele will tell you, we tried to play everybody and no one would play us. If I'm Travis Steele, I'm printing out all those emails and I'm taking them right to the committee and saying, see, we tried to play Team A and Team B and Team C and they said no. All we can do is win the games on our schedule. Okay, so if you were going to put a number on it, how many losses can the Redhawks afford to still be an at-large team if they don't win the conference tournament championship?
Probably 3.
Oh, that's high.
Maybe 2, but my take overall on them is I'm very fascinated which lane the committee leans more towards down as they evaluate Miami. Because by the eye test and by the analytics, the offense both look great.
Yep.
But do they view Miami as a team? Hey, we turned on the tape, we grinded the film in this offense with this. Because you can watch Miami through that way and how they're humming. Or you can just, beep, boop, beep, boop, look at the numbers. I like doing both. And say they've got this efficiency rating. And Miami checks that box as well. Which does the committee put more stock into as they evaluate and project up a mid-major like Miami? I think that'll show a lot about just the state of the selection committee.
I think it's always interesting, too, if you're a committee member and you're trying to put together the best, most memorable, entertaining tournament you can, to have one of the nation's most efficient and fun offenses. I think that's a great thing for the entertainment factor and might help Miami. We'll see once they get in that room. I say they can afford to lose one regular season game because if they're not winning the MAC championship, that means they're losing a conference tournament game. That would put them at 2 losses. I think a 2-loss Mid-American Conference team that's created the kind of mid-season buzz they've created, I think has a great shot of getting in the NCAA tournament. And I hope all the people talking about it like we are right now can maybe sway things towards that, because I'd rather see a team like Miami get an at-large bid in a mid-major conference than the 10th best team in a Power 4. Do we need the 10th best team in the Big 12 or the ACC? And maybe that's unfair, okay? Maybe those teams deserve it. They would beat Miami if they lined up and played it. Maybe you're right. But I think for just variety's sake, entertainment factor, and for a great story, all these things matter to the committee. They should. We'll see if Miami's able to win the day. If it gets there, maybe they'll just win the MAC championship.
Yeah.
This won't be a problem. Okay, now we'll finish out the podcast with Charlie's segment. Now we get a gold nugget from one of the great reporters here in Cincinnati. We dive into the notebook and into the great stories that Charlie's been working on. What is your gold nugget for us today to end the gold standard?
So as a part of the next wave that I talked about with the Reds, a name you got to know, a name we've talked about is Hector Rodriguez. And I won't get into all the weeds here, but a huge...
You love Hector Rodriguez.
I mean, he's
you
just
should.
He's just a name you need to know that no one's talking about that could make the open, that was nearly called up on September 1st last year to be their spark down the stretch in the final month of the season. So that tells you something about where he stands. A big part of his story is his experience over the last 3 years as a very young player in a very highly competitive Dominican Winter League. And I want to get into all that. What I will get into is last night in the finals while leading off, and again, high competition, he had a monster game, and he was named the MVP of the game, whatever. He won that. And I'm following the league through the Twitter account, which is in Spanish. And Twitter automatically translates for me. And so the player of the game for their league in the finals, you're called the Lion of the Party. I don't know what that translates to in Spanish. I think that's cool as heck. I think we should just call Hector from now on the Lion of the Party.
Hey, are you bummed at all that Ellie's not playing in the World Baseball Classic?
No. There's more that I know than I can report.
Okay.
But I will say this, and I think this is fair to say, and what's been reported with this quad and with the Reds managing him, and they had conversations about this, I think the under-discussed part of this, and I hate to say this about Ellie, but Team Dominican shortstop is Geraldo Perdomo, who fourth in NL MVP voting last year. I had several conversations with very smart people I trust about baseball about how this is a superstar player right now, not projecting up. Perdomo's a stud now. He's their shortstop. Their third basemen are Manny Machado and Jose Ramirez.
So good.
I think that's an under-discussed part of this.
Okay, good answer. I'll say this for the fan. I'm bummed that we don't get to see him because the World Baseball Classic has become a really cool thing for me to watch, at least personally. I think back to was it Shohei against Mike Trout at bat, when everybody stopped what they're doing to watch baseball in a time where baseball isn't supposed to be at the front of mind. But I get it, and you make a great point there about Ellie De La Cruz. He is the great Charlie Goldsmith. I'm Joe Daneman. We do this every week, the gold standard here on Fox 19.